point. A reminder that today, President Trump's key tool for deploying tariffs will face a critical legal test in the Supreme Court.
The U.S. tariffs and the uncertainty that they're creating will cost us around 1.8% of our GDP. Let me translate that. That's about $50 billion lost from our economy.
The court ruled against Trump over tariffs. It would represent a major political blow from a high court during the president's second term. For City News.
The U.S. Supreme Court just delivered a stunning blow, leaving Canada furious after the court slams Trump's tariffs on Canadian trade. It's like watching the referee finally call a foul after years of Trump playing economic dodgeball with America's trading partners. And now, with billions on the line and Ottawa's patience wearing thin, this ruling has set off diplomatic fireworks.
Yeah, I mean, look, based on the questions that the Supreme Court justices asked the two sides at the hearing last week, the overall conclusion seemed to be that, look, there's a lot of skepticism that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was used in the correct way.
After years of quietly absorbing the shockwaves of Trump's economic experiments, the U.S. Supreme Court has finally slammed the brakes on his sweeping tariffs. And the fallout has hit Ottawa like a thunderclap. This isn't just a headline. It's the economic soap opera of 2025, where law, politics, and national pride collide in the most dramatic way possible. For years, Trump has used tariffs like his personal joystick to steer global trade, declaring economic emergencies to justify taxes on imports from everyone, including allies like Canada. But now the highest court in America has basically said, hold up, you can't just tax the world because you feel like it.
In Washington, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments over President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on Wednesday. A closely watched case analyzing if Trump has the legal authority to impose most of the tariffs and its impact to the U.S. economy and global trade.
Inside the marble halls of the U.S. Supreme Court, the atmosphere was electric. Protesters crowded the steps, waving flags from Canada, Mexico, and China, chanting against Trump's trade policies. Reporters described the scene as tense, chaotic, and historic. The case wasn't just about tariffs, it was about power. Could a president really declare a national emergency and slap massive import taxes on America's closest allies? Trump believed he could, invoking a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or EA, to justify his actions.
Discussed and involved the tariffs announced in April on almost all trading partners with the United States, along with tariffs imposed in February on imports from Canada, China, and Mexico.
But legal experts argued that this law was never meant to give presidents the power to rewrite global trade rules overnight. And now, for the first time, that question landed before a conservative-led Supreme Court that had to decide whether Trump had gone too far. The hearing was fiery from the start. Justice Kavanaugh grilled Trump's lawyers with a mix of sarcasm and skepticism, wondering aloud why Congress would let the president shut down trade entirely, but not impose a 1% tariff. It creates a donut hole, he joked, prompting laughter in the courtroom.
While Justice Brett Kavanaugh mentioned that courts had previously allowed President Richard Nixon to use similar tariff powers during his administration. And while justices questioned both sides, a tone of reservations about the administration relying on emergencies to issue the unchecked tariffs was evident.
Beneath the humor, though, the tension was real. Billions of dollars and the future of America's trade relationships were on the line. The Treasury Department admitted it had collected nearly $90 billion from Trump's emergency tariffs. And if the court ruled them unconstitutional, that money might have to be refunded to importers, including major Canadian companies. By midday, it was clear the justices were divided, but not necessarily along party lines. Chief Justice John Roberts, often the quiet stabilizer of the bench, showed open skepticism toward Trump's legal arguments.
What is your plan if they end up making a decision that's not in your favor?
Well, I'd rather discuss that later. I hope we're going to win that case. I think it's one of the most important cases in the history of our country.
He pointed out that the IEPA had never been used for tariffs before and questioned whether this was a major question, a legal term, meaning the president can't make massive economic moves unless Congress explicitly says he can. Roberts' line of questioning made Trump's defense visibly uncomfortable. Even Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch, both Trump appointees, appeared uneasy about giving presidents limitless power to tax imports. Gorsuch, in particular, worried aloud that if Trump could declare an economic emergency and tax Canadian steel, then a future president could declare climate change an emergency and tax oil imports at will.
So much evolves around tariffs as a defensive mechanism for our country, as national security for our country.
The tariffs drove prices up, profits down, and patience to the breaking point. For Canada, this wasn't just economic policy, it was personal. Back inside, attorney Neil Katyal, representing American companies suing the Trump administration, delivered a knockout argument. He said the IEPA law allows the president to stop shipments entirely through embargoes, but doesn't let him turn imports into a tax stream. Embargoes stop the shipment. Katie said tariffs start the tax bill. His line landed hard. Justice Sotomayor immediately jumped in, grilling Trump's lawyer for claiming tariffs weren't taxes.
They said, oh, I don't want to talk about affordability. The reason I don't want to talk about affordability is because everybody knows that it's far less expensive under Trump than it was under Sleepy Joe Biden. And the prices are way down.
You want to say tariffs are not taxes, she shot back, but they are. Even Trump himself has bragged for years about how much money the tariffs bring in. You can't call it revenue one day and deny it's a tax the next, unless you think the Supreme Court won't notice. As the debate stretched past 2 hours, hunger, both literal and political, began to set in. The justices were deep into the legal weeds, dissecting decades of trade precedent. Justice Kavanaugh referenced a 1976 case where President Ford's oil tariffs were upheld, suggesting history wasn't entirely against Trump.
This case could have a very big impact on the global economy and may also set some limits on presidential power.
But Katyal countered that Ford's case involved a completely different law, one that actually mentioned tariffs. Congress knows exactly how to delegate its tariff powers, he argued. APA looks nothing like those laws. Roberts nodded slightly, a sign that he was buying it if the Chief Justice's body language was any hint the Trump administration was in trouble. Meanwhile, Canadian media exploded with headlines like Supreme Court showdown could save our exports, and U.S. finally faces reality of Trump's tariff madness. Prime Minister Trudeau, cautious but clearly vindicated, called the hearing a necessary reckoning for economic sanity.
Just a few minutes into the arguments, a lawyer for the Trump administration ran into a united liberal wall.
It's a congressional power, not a presidential power to tax.
The frustration in Ottawa wasn't just about lost dollars. It was about respect. Canada had stood by the U.S. through wars, crisis, and decades of partnership, only to be hit with the same tariffs as hostile nations. Trump's justification, a so-called national emergency caused by trade deficits. But here's the irony. The U.S. has always had a trade deficit. It hasn't run a surplus since 1975. Calling that an emergency is like calling gravity a conspiracy. As the legal arguments wrapped up, Trump's lawyer, D. John Sauer, tried to rescue the case by reframing tariffs as tools to regulate commerce, not raise revenue. And you want to say tariffs are not taxes, but that's exactly what they are. They're generating money from American citizens, revenue, but that only deepened the skepticism. Justice Roberts questioned whether Sauer was relying too much on outdated cases, and Justice Barrett pressed for clear limits on presidential authority. Even Gorsuch, who usually champions executive power in foreign affairs, seemed alarmed by the idea that one president could unilaterally tax the world, so another president, Gorsuch said, could declare a climate emergency and impose tariffs under the same law. Sauer hesitated, then admitted, yes. The courtroom went silent. That answer may have sealed the fate of Trump's tariffs. By the time the gavel fell, the writing was on the wall.
But some conservatives, like Chief Justice John Roberts, also were skeptical.
The exercise of the power is to impose tariffs, right? And the statute doesn't use the word tariffs.
The court wasn't just questioning the tariffs. It was questioning the entire idea that a president could wield emergency powers as a trade weapon. The major questions doctrine, the same one used to strike down Biden's student loan plan, loomed large. If Congress didn't clearly give the president tariff power, then Trump's emergency tariffs were unconstitutional. And as Roberts closed the session, announcing the cases submitted, the message was clear. The days of tariff by tweet might finally be over. Outside, demonstrators erupted. Some cheered, waving signs reading, "End the tariff war."
I think it's the most important subject discussed by the Supreme Court in 100 years.
The administration is relying on a 1977 federal law that gives presidents power to, quote, regulate imports during a national emergency.
Others booed, calling the case a political witch hunt. But across the northern border, the reaction was far more unified. Canadian officials, manufacturers, and workers saw this as long overdue justice. It's about time the system worked, one Ontario steelworker told reporters. We've been paying the price for years while Trump played hero. With the verdict pending, Canada's fury wasn't just about anger, it was about exhaustion. As the Supreme Court session wrapped up, Washington's corridors began to hum with quiet panic. The justice's tone was sharper than expected.
Disadvantage.
If we can at least be on, again, a level playing field with our global competition, it gives us a chance to showcase California.
The legal implications were enormous. For Canada, this wasn't just a court case, it was a reckoning. Years of frustration over Trump's unpredictable trade policies had finally reached the highest court in the land. When Trump had justified his tariffs by citing national security, it had left Canada, America's closest ally, wondering if friendship even meant anything anymore. Now, for the first time, that argument was being picked apart under the bright lights of constitutional scrutiny. Canadian media outlets jumped on every soundbite. Supreme Court challenges Trump's trade tantrum blared one headline in the Toronto Star.
Schwartz says tariffs are crippling small businesses. He has to pay tariffs up front of 15%.
What is your fear?
Fear is companies like mine going out of business, or some already have.
Economists filled TV panels explaining how Trump's steel and aluminum taxes cost Canada billions in exports and wiped out entire sectors. Lumber, auto parts, machinery, all caught in a crossfire that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with ego. Ottawa's top officials could barely hide their satisfaction. As one trade minister put it with a smirk, it's refreshing to see logic finally make a cameo appearance in Washington. Inside the courtroom, even conservative justices appeared skeptical. Justice Gorsuch's biting remark that if a president can use emergency powers to tax Canadian goods,
the justification is being used for a power to impose tariffs on any product from any country in any amount for any length of time. And the basis for the claim seems to be a misfit.